Well, hello, free people of the Rocky Mountain region, and welcome to this Free State Colorado interview. Today, I'm joined by Cory Gaines, a must-read author at his own Substack, Colorado Accountability Project, in Complete Colorado. Well, Cory, I hope you are well, and thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Definitely. Well, dark money, it's a word that's used by both sides of the political spectrum to conjure up images and cast doubts in the minds of voters. But the reality is that political activists use federal and state law to move money around to fund their agenda, oftentimes out of the public eye. Now, Cory, you've recently written about a network of organizations that has seen literal billions of dollars spent on different projects across the country, and even some of that money spent here in Colorado. So, Cory, what can you tell us about the Tide Center?
Yeah, sure. So, the Tides, and if I get the name wrong, forgive me. I believe the overall umbrella term now is Tides Nexus. The Tides Foundation was the start, and then what they've done is over time they've spun off, all kinds of like daughter organizations under their umbrella to handle different things. Tide Center is a spinoff. It's an incubator, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But it is the only one that I could find when I searched our state's expense reports. It's the only one that I've gotten state money that have gotten state money here in Colorado. So it was the one I focused on.
Oh, interesting. I mean, if people haven't heard this name, it's definitely been out there for a little bit, but not as much here in
Oh yeah.
Colorado. But the Tides Foundation, the Tides Center, the Tides Nexus, this whole network of activists really are seeing so much money flow through across the country to really try and reshape our political sphere. So it's really interesting to see who's kind of behind the scenes, where this money's coming from, and just how there's this whole network of organizations kind of operating outside of that public eye to really have a say and control over our political system, even here in Colorado. It's just interesting stuff.
It is, yeah. And Colorado, I think since the Blueprint, which is a great book, if you haven't read it yet, you should read it. Um, it's the Republicans and the conservatives have caught up, although the infrastructure here in Colorado is not as good. But ever since the Blueprint stuff, Colorado has a really, really well developed and mature, for lack of a better word, I've used in other op-eds, ecosystem for all of these various 501c3 nonprofits they're funneling money in, they're spreading it around, and basically they are buying our politics in this state.
Interesting stuff that definitely needs to be exposed. So really applaud your writing there and really encourage people to check out your Substack. At your Substack here, one of your articles about the Tides Foundation, you said, quote, "The Tides Foundation has made some news lately for being not only a dark money behemoth, but also for being connected with unsavory groups like BLM and Palestinian protests on college campuses, as well as taking gobs of federal grant dollars to spread around various causes." The third and fourth links below give you some context here. And I do appreciate at your Substack, everything's linked and referenced. And that's one of my things I love about what you're writing is there's always you provide the resources for people to dig in further and kind of continue that research.
Yeah, it's something where people can go look. And it's also, I mean, to me, it always feels a little bit like a credibility thing. Like, this isn't just me making an assertion because I feel this way. This is actually based on something, and here's what I'm basing it on. And yeah, the Tides Foundation, there's, I think, it's Data Republican maybe on Twitter. You could double check me if I'm wrong on that. But yeah, there was a big blow up on Twitter with that handle or group. I'm not sure who's running it, but the Tides Foundation was big, big, big on there for quite a while. And they get lots and lots of federal grant money, as well as tons and tons of private donations. And the reason we call it dark money um, is because as a 501c3, they're not required to tell you who their donors are. So we don't really, you can track the government money that comes into them, but the private money that comes into them, nobody knows who's given that.
Yeah, and that's one of the most interesting things is you have money spent here in Colorado from these entities, and there's not really a clear understanding of where the money comes from. So, after Citizens
Mhm.
United and all these changes with tax law and campaign finance law at the federal level, we've really seen this growth of these nonprofits kind of setting themselves up to for lack of a better word, almost like wash or funnel money into political action committees, into different initiatives, into different activist led projects across the country. And, I think, Cory, especially now with the newer Trump administration and the whole Musk thing and this and that, but like USAID, I think that
Mhm.
was one of the big things that kind of a lot of people became aware of how some of this can work, where you have a government entity basically giving grants and giving money to these nonprofits that end up using that money for political causes here in our own country and overseas. So I think,
Mhm.
people are a little bit more aware, and especially like you said here in Colorado, people who've been paying attention or really reading and watching what's going on, we kind of have seen just this massive growth of these organizations just popping up out of nowhere and then seemingly, able to spend all this money and really push for certain ballot measures or push for certain ideas. And then yet they just disappear and nobody seems to know who they are necessarily without digging in.
Hmm. Right. And what you also see, there are rules. I won't go into full details on it, but 501c3s, there are rules about how much overt politics they can engage in, relative to how much of their revenue and how much money they bring in. But it's funny. I start looking through this stuff, and you see this connects to this, connects to this. And okay, so maybe the Tide Center is not spending directly on a particular ballot issue. They do a little bit. We'll talk about that in a second. But what they're doing is then they're, like you were saying, they have these little spin-offs and startups that they're helping. The spin-offs and startups are actually actively involved in politics. I don't believe it was the case with Tide Center, but there are others where they give money to, say, for example, there's a group called Warm Cookies of the Revolution, which is basically, they're not out there advocating for a particular candidate or issue, but what they're doing is advocating for a particular political orientation. So, I mean, it's kind of winky winky. We're not spending on politics, but we really are.
Oh yeah, definitely, and especially when you see like a lot of this money going to help voter turnout or voter registration or things like that, or just voter awareness. It
Hmm.
seems to me, if I was doing that kind of project and had a lot of money, I could pick where to run those types of product projects, where to try and get out the vote, where to try and get people registered in order to kind of sway some of these elections. So yeah, there's a lot of tricks I think that these groups and organizations can use to
Hmm.
really, like you said, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. We're not directly electioneering, but we
Right.
are, kind of putting our thumb on the scales to try and shift things in a certain way within the legal limits that they have.
Yep. I'm going to call it second order politicking. That's what we would call it.
I like that. I like that. Well, on your Substack too, you link to a TOPS report, which is this transparency online project. Definitely encourage people to look into that, learn more about that. And I'd love when Cory and I think we're going to talk about that in a future video. But
Yep.
you were able to really find in there that the Tide Center is not it's not a Colorado organization, but has received some state of Colorado money, so our tax money since the last 5, 6 years, 7 years, they've gotten $142,000. I mean, that's it's not a ton when you consider this is $1 billion group or $1 billion network, but that's still our tax money.
Hmm. Yeah. It's not zero, right? By their finances compared with others that I've seen, like I said, this is relatively small. I mean, others we're talking in the millions, tens of millions. So Tide Center is relatively small in terms of their government money uptake, but as you'll see at least partly what that stuff gets used for. It's basically taking your money and turning it into some form of advocacy, at least in the example that I found. And I don't know about you. The appropriate amount of tax dollars to me that ought to be spent on advocacy for any cause is zero, right? I don't care what your beliefs are. I would hope that we could all agree that tax money ought to go to things that are sort of politically neutral. And I don't believe that's the case, at least in the example that I found for what they were using it for.
Yeah, great point all around. I think most people would agree with that. And this is the kind of stuff that, is so valuable with your reporting and others to get this information out there that people need to be aware of and understand that, all this money that's going into our state government and they continuously don't have enough. Of course, the politicians say we need more money, we don't have enough money, and then you find out, sure, yeah, it's only $100,000 here, it's only $20,000 there, but nonetheless, you add it up and it's like, well, there's the money you probably need in order to be solvent as a state government instead of, getting involved in all these little projects.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how many it would pave, but I would much rather see this money going to fixing the roads out near me than going to the Tide Center, because like the roads out here are a definite need for everybody. There's like a 6 inch gap between the two lanes of I-76 between Sterling and Julesburg. Like, I mean, it's big enough to practically swallow my little car if I wanted to change lanes, and yet then but we've got money to put here.
Wow. Wow. So, and then you showed here too that there's this grant being spent in Colorado. So the Tide Center, getting some of this tax money, getting money from a lot of different foundations and organizations, and even in the federal government. Well, they do spend some of that money here. How did you find this information?
So this comes off of, and it's probably something that you and I will do a video on as well, because it's another thing that you can look at when you start trying to figure out these nonprofit things. They're required by law to do an IRS Form 990, and this is on there. You're never going to find on the Form 990 who gave them money. Like there's nothing on there that says who gave Tide Center money. They are not required to disclose their donors, but they are required if they give money away to say where that money went and how much. So the Tide Center, when I looked on their most recent tax form 990, which has to list out every single grant that the foundation gave, most of them were in, I believe, the San Francisco area and California. But I searched for anything that had Colorado in the mailing address, and these two things came up. Um, the first entry under there, and what I did was is this was way down the list, so I copied the header row and then put the two entries below that. um this is the first one was Green Latinos, which if anybody in here has ever testified for a bill, or if you've ever testified at, for example, an air quality control commission meeting, a lot of times these, unelected, appointed boards around the state, if they're doing rulemakings, they'll take testimony. I can tell you the number of times, like, you listen to the PUC hearings, you listen to things like Air Quality Control Commission hearings, Green Latinos is there. They're there, they're advocating, they're speaking up. And as you can clearly see, Green Latinos gets quite a bit of money from the Tide Center. What you're seeing in this row, by the way, that's not a cumulative total. That's a year. Their most recent 990, which I believe would be 2023, is the most recently available one. And this is just for that year. If I recall correctly, when I look back at older 990s, they also got Green Latinos money from Tide Center in the previous years, but I just didn't include that in the Substack. And then the one below it is the National Association of Asian and Pacific Islanders. That one was just like, I looked at it and I was like, okay. I'll be honest, I don't know anything about that group or what they got the money for. I've never heard them in any other thing. So that one could have just been maybe some sort of good works kind of thing. If you look at the graphic on the screen, the far right column would be sort of the purpose of the grant. Sometimes that's more vague than others, when you go look in the 990s. So,
Yeah, I mean, the Green Latinos group is something that pops up time and time again. And from what I understand, they're not really actually based in Colorado. They have an office in Boulder, of course, as you can imagine. But it's this organization that's really promoting this renewable energy stuff and fighting against our clean, natural gas, coal, oil, all of that kind of stuff. That I believe they were against the nuclear bill this year too, but don't quote me on that. I could be wrong. But yeah, entity that just seems to pop up at all these hearings, like you said, whether it's a legislative committee hearing, public utilities, whatever it is, all of a sudden these people pop up and have their talking points ready and really do
Mhm.
what they can, in my mind, to try and lobby our lawmakers and rule makers to push a specific agenda. And well, here's an example, folks, of how how some of these groups get funded by these
Mhm.
big behemoths in terms of pushing these kind of more left-leaning causes.
Right, yeah, because if you think about it, you and I as ordinary citizens, it's hard to keep abreast of all this stuff. There's boards all over the place, there's legislative hearings. Golly, wouldn't it be nice if somebody could give you money so that somebody could have their full-time job be to monitor these hearings, know when they're scheduled, send emails out to volunteers with lists of talking points, right? Well, it turns out that's what Tide Center does. Tide Center gives groups like Green Latinos money so that they have the wherewithal to actually be at these hearings. And that's what I mean about that second order activism. No, their stuff is not directly giving to political campaigns for an issue, but they're funding this stuff. And then these minions is probably too strong a word, but like these little groups then are doing this astroturf activism, getting out there, gathering volunteers, keeping track of all these hearings, which puts you and I at kind of a disadvantage because we don't have somebody funding and reminding us and helping us with talking points, etc.
Yeah, no, those are great points. I think that's a great explanation of how this works. And, I've said for a while now that that's how the Democrats have taken control of Colorado, or, to be more precise, maybe this left-wing progressives, this kind of authoritarian branch, in my perspective, of these left-wing types of people. And it's because they have full-time staff working on these issues, working on trying to
Mm-hmm.
have control over our political system. And yeah, I mean, people like us, we have full-time jobs. We can't necessarily be focused on, we do what we can, but at the same time, to have around the clock full-time jobs of hiring
Mm-hmm.
people and organizations dedicated towards pushing certain policy agendas and trying to shift our political um, spectrum or political sphere towards this political ecosystem might be a better word there, push that towards whatever their agenda is. Yeah, I mean, it's like how can we compete against that except try and expose it, be aware of it, and know what's going on.
Right, yeah. I mean, I would never say it's useless. Don't advocate. Don't get me wrong. That's not what I'm saying here. I think it's actually more important than ever that you do advocate because somebody's got to be there to give the other half of the story so that these boards don't go home thinking that they're doing God's work and everybody agrees with them and the few people that testified.
Yes.
But it's a real challenge. So I guess I would recommend, if anything, just pick an issue, pick a board, follow that board, and then maybe you start posting on your social media about what that board's doing, so that other people can see it.
Well said, for sure. And I think there is a lot of value in just regular citizens, regular individuals getting together and showing up and having that kind of outreach and advocacy towards the elected officials or rule makers, because, it's more authentic. It's actually part of the community. It can kind of, in my mind, matters more than these professional groups. It's like, okay, yeah, sure, you're testifying for the umpteenth time this legislative session on the same issue. It's like, yeah, we know, they know who you are. They know that's what you're getting paid to do, as opposed to voters and people in the
Mhm.
community saying, hey, listen, this is something going on. Hopefully lawmakers or rule makers would pay a little more attention to that.
Right. Yeah. And when they've heard the same talking points, I mean, these boards they're not dumb. I might disagree with the way they vote. I disagree with running our government this way, but they're not fools. And surely by the time they've seen 30 emails, which have the same text, and heard the same five talking points over and over and over again over the course of an hour. Yeah. Imagine if you were a citizen sneaking in there and you got to put in your 2 cents and like, holy smokes, somebody normal, somebody that's like a real human instead of reading a script. So yeah.
Yeah, 100%, definitely. And you did find at least one example here at Tracer, the Colorado Secretary of State's campaign finance website, of the Tide Center here directly funding a political initiative here in Colorado.
Yeah. I so there's three sort of standard basic things I always look at when I start looking at nonprofits. The top expense reports, their Form 990s, and then I go to Tracer and I look at their political contributions, if any. You won't always find everything, right? But it turns out, and when I wrote my first post on this, it was just kind of a curiosity to me. It was like, oh, okay, yeah, well, Tide Center has been big in wolf reintroduction in this state. How about that? And that was kind of that first post where I just said, okay, well, yeah, they've been decently big. You could go through the columns there and look at all the individual political contributions and add them up. It's a pretty sizable amount. Tide Center is obviously big boosters of getting wolves back to Colorado.
Yeah, I mean, if people can't see on the screen, over $400,000 spent. I mean, that's quite a big chunk of change for sure to go to Rocky Mountain Wolf Action Fund back in the 2020 election cycle there to get wolves, the forced wolf reintroduction here in Colorado. So, and that didn't pass by the widest of margins. It definitely was a significant margin, but you got to think, nearly $500,000 coming in from 400,000 just from the Tide Center, and then you have all these other groups out there that
Mhm.
are San Francisco, like they're not even in Colorado, and they're here now. Colorado ranchers, Colorado people who
Yeah.
live in the mountains. I mean, now we got to deal with this by having these California groups spend this money. I mean, it's like it's just a perfect example here of what most people complain about with politics here in Colorado is like, yeah, these out of state people can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, push this agenda on us that doesn't necessarily benefit our communities, and now we got to deal with the consequences and the fallout and spend our money and resources. And now we have the state government having to compensate ranchers, and it's this big issue, and they don't have enough money and this and that. It's like it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm saying that's it. I'm saying, right? I mean, what, like, do the people from San Francisco, are they going to come out here and stay up at night with the ranchers and worry about the ranchers' livelihoods? I mean, why is it that people in San Francisco can buy this much influence? It's just startling to me, and I think sometimes it just makes me shake my head. Like, why is somebody in San Francisco getting this mixed in? And why are we allowing this kind of influence in our politics in this state?
Yeah, great points, great points. And like you said, this is a kind of an organization where it's not very, we know who the Tide Center is, we know kind of their agenda, but at the same time, we don't know where all that they're getting all their money from and who's really behind this at what level and who potentially could benefit from it. Who knows? Not necessarily
Yeah.
this example, but any of these other examples that exist out there in the country.
Yeah, just some moneyed person somewhere or persons somewhere really, really keen on rewilding Colorado. And it's really nice, especially if you don't have to live with the consequences of that rewilding, like the ranchers on the Western Slope do.
Yeah, great point there. Great point. Uh, Based on your writing there, kind of put this together here. I thought this slide could be useful for people just to understand
Mhm.
a little bit about this whole dark money, what we've been talking about today. But like the money's coming from these donors and grants, some of the foundations. I mean, I even saw the Open Society Foundation. That's the George Soros connected. His organization gave money to the Tide Center. So it's this huge network of all these different people with tons of money, and some of it's tax money. I mean, a lot of it's tax money actually to the Tides Foundation. There's these
Mhm.
endowments and grants, and sure, they maybe do a lot of things that are not political, but nonetheless, all of a sudden you see $400,000. The fact that they could spend that kind of money on a political cause in Colorado for one election cycle just shows the power and the huge
Mhm.
amount of money that they have. So that money
Yeah.
comes from those foundations, tax money grants, goes over to their group, their whole entire network of C3s with $1 billion in assets, and then they can fund that to different organizations, environmental causes, left-wing initiatives. I mean, this is
Mhm.
how politics works that people aren't necessarily fully aware of, I'd say.
Yeah. Yeah, the other thing about the Tide Center, not Tides Foundation per se, but the Tide Center specifically, this was the main point of my first post, is they're what's called an incubator. So they were one of the spinoffs of the Tides Foundation, and their job is to act as an incubator. In order to get this nonprofit status, the 501c3 status, I looked at the process once. It takes hours and hours of paperwork. It takes a fair bit of time and money. And if you are, some little nascent startup in some storefront wanting to do something with like the Green Latinos and talk about disadvantaged communities and things like that, if you're a single little startup trying to get that stuff done, imagine how much help it would be to have an incubator, a sheltering organization that can help with the paperwork, help with the time. They can help you get a lease and help you find office space. And not just that, but if you go under their wing, so to speak, as an incubator, they can confer their tax exempt status unto you so you can start working. So, like you had mentioned a few times in the talk so far, what happens is you can get these little pop ups that might not have had the ability to survive had they had to go all the way on their own, and might not be as involved and as big as they are had they not had an incubator like the Tide Center to give them a little nudge and some nutrients and a nice space to grow until they can get big enough on their own that they can start doing their own work. Or sometimes, and this happens too, they wink out of existence just as quickly as they came in, having finished whatever it is they wanted to do.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, these organizations have definitely a leg up and to come into Colorado, or you say you have a group of activists here in Colorado who want to fundamentally change our political ecosystem, and to have the help from some other organization and the legal protection and the tax protection and this and that. I mean, definitely that's how a lot of this works, and it's so interesting, I think,
Mhm.
out there for people. And we didn't talk about it with the wolf section, but you actually found another follow-up article you have on your Substack. You found some more spending that the Tides Foundation got over the wolf issue. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, it was. So when I looked through the expense reports, there wasn't. I may go back and revisit it. There wasn't. I'm busy. None of it looked terribly remarkable. Like I said, it's not huge gobs of money coming and going here. But there was this tiny little $500 line item all the way. I think it was at the very top, and it was to History Colorado. And it just made me think, like, why in the world did $500 go from History Colorado to the Tide Center? Just the smallness of the amount and the fact that it was History Colorado. Um, and then, I'll skip a ton of detail. It was kind of a difficult process of finding this, but I get this invoice back, and it was an invoice from the Tide Center to History Colorado, and it was $500 for a speech that somebody from the Tide Center came and delivered at History Colorado. It was an honorarium for a lecture. History Colorado it's called the Rosenberry Lecture Series, and God, they've been doing it for a long time. I think it goes back to the 80s. Um, and there's a series of lectures over the course of the year, and History Colorado gets the lectures together, and I presume they're in History Colorado's building. Um, And so, way back in, I believe it was 2017 or 2018, somebody from Tide Center came out and gave a lecture to History Colorado about how good it would be to have gray wolves reintroduced in Colorado. Now, keep in mind, a couple years later, it's on the ballot. And guess who's supporting that with $400,000? Well, it's Tide Center again. Gee golly, what a funny coincidence. It's almost like groundwork is being laid there. Um, and the thing that struck me about it too was I go to History Colorado and I say, hey, did you guys ever invite anybody from ag in, or did you guys ever invite anybody from ranching or things like that to come and talk? And I never got a straight answer. They did give me a statement. Um, but they never really gave me a full straight answer, but I did get a list of all their lecturers, and there was maybe one in the 2 years bracketing when Tide Center came, because I looked a year, I looked that year, I looked a year out, I looked a year back, I looked 2 years, and then 2 years back. There was maybe one that, if you were really generous, looked like it might have tangentially related to agriculture in the state. Now, keep in mind, beef is one of the largest industries in this state. So they're talking about wolves, but there's no room for ag, apparently, which struck me as odd.
Yeah. Very interesting stuff, Corey. Really appreciate all your writings, your reporting, everything that you investigate. Definitely people need to check out if you haven't. Subscribe to the Colorado Accountability Project on Substack and check it out. I always appreciate your work, Corey, and shining a light on some of the unseen areas of Colorado politics. And it's important stuff. But what else do we need to? What else do people need to know?
Just keep your eyes and ears open. And if you see stuff, speak up about it. And like I said earlier, it's hard to try and do something. And it might be a little bit overwhelming if you look at it and say, like, well, there's only, I can't do anything, so I'm not going to try. That's not the right attitude to take. Pick a thing. And maybe you don't even speak at the meeting, but maybe you sign up for Air Quality Commission, Control Commission's email blast list, and something comes up and it catches your eye and you're like, well, that's weird. Why are they trying to do social cost of carbon? And then you put that out on your social media. And I don't want to obligate you, but people could send it to me. Maybe I'm going to shut my door real quick. Sorry. Maybe you email me or contact me through my Substack. I have limited amounts of time to do stuff, but if it's important, I might see if I could either give it to somebody else or maybe write about it myself. But just stay involved. Don't give in to that temptation that says, well, it's pointless.
Definitely. One little spark could light a big fire. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
big believer in that. People just find one thing or one organization, one interest, one issue even, or one specific jurisdiction or district maybe that you live in to say,
Mm-hmm.
hey, I'm going to really pay attention to what's going on in this part of my community. And yeah, it's empowering. And if we all did it, many hands make light work. So that's
Yep.
really where it comes down to. And yeah, we got to do it
Yeah.
ourselves. We don't have $1 billion like the Tides groups do to do all of this, but the
If
power
only.
of just individuals getting involved and speaking out
Mhm.
and knowing what's going on definitely helps level that playing field for sure.
Yeah. And trust me too, like if you are interested in the financial stuff and if you want to start doing the same kind of looking that I know you've done or that I've done or that there's others in social, believe me, there is nothing special about me or anybody else that enables us to do it. It's just a matter of, are you willing, do you know where to look, number one, and then do you want to start taking the time to really look at this stuff? But you can do it. So if anybody else is interested too about how to do this, keep your eyes and ears open. We'll probably have some information on, kind of a basic primer on to what to do here in the coming future. So keep your eyes and ears open.
Definitely looking forward to that. And as always, Corey, really appreciate you, sir. Best wishes and look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate you having me on.
All right, take care.
Say it.